Hello everyone, welcome back to Chilling Horror, Tales 2 4.7. Tonight's story takes us back to one of the darkest corners of 19th century London, to a room not just feared but whispered about for generations. The legend, over 200 years old, but the horror inside that room is still there. Before we unlock the door, if you're drawn to the weird, the dark, and the terrifying, told in a story unlike any other, you've come to the right place. We tell scary stories every week, so if you're the dark type, sneak into Like's bathroom, switch their toothpaste with Novocaine, then hit subscribe and turn on all notifications, because what you're about to hear is very real. It was late evening in the year 1840. The cobbled streets of London glistened under pale gaslights as five men stood together, tense and curious, on the front porch of an opulent townhouse in Berkeley Square, one of the most prestigious neighborhoods in the city. At the center of them stood a 30-year-old British nobleman, Nathan Aldridge. He was dashing, well-dressed, and grinning like a man about to leap headfirst into something insane. The address? 50 Berkeley Square, a grand marble and brick townhouse facing a peaceful garden square. Built nearly a century earlier, it was the crown jewel of aristocratic life. But Nathan wasn't here to socialize. He wasn't knocking to sip tea or trade gossip. He was here to win a bet. By title and bloodline, Nathan Aldridge was a nobleman. But under the gentleman's waistcoat beat the heart of a thrill-seeker, a man who craved the extraordinary. He was known in elite circles for one thing: if you dared him, he'd do it. Not for money, not even for glory. He lived for the rush, the bragging rights, the story. So when whispers began to circulate about a haunted room inside 50 Berkeley Square, a room no one dared spend the night in, Nathan didn't hesitate. That night, as his polished boots clicked on the stone steps, Nathan turned back to his five friends with a mischievous smirk. Some of them looked thrilled, others pale, uneasy. But Nathan? He was electric with anticipation. This was going to be legendary. He raised his fist and knocked. A few seconds passed. Then, the front door creaked open. A middle-aged man stood there, silhouetted by candlelight. His name was Edmund Grant, the current owner of the house. And like Nathan, he was a member of one of London's most exclusive gentlemen's clubs. They weren't close, but they were acquainted. And Edmund had a reputation. Or rather, his house did. Even though Nathan had written ahead about this night, about the dare, Edmund still looked uneasy. His eyes narrowed. And then, with a voice laced with warning, he asked, "Are you sure you really want to do this?" Nathan tapped the pistol holstered at his hip. "Absolutely." And then Edmund Grant returned. His footsteps echoed faintly as he stepped into the dining room once more. But the light in his eyes had vanished. He looked like a man burdened by knowledge he wished he didn't have. Without saying a word, he reached into the inside pocket of his dark overcoat and pulled out a heavy old iron key. Its surface was tarnished with age, but the groove still caught the flicker of candlelight. He walked to the table and placed it in the center with a soft metallic clink. Silence, instant, utter. No one spoke. No one reached for it. They just stared as if that key could bite. Finally, Edmund cleared his throat and said, voice low and grim, "In the 10 years I've owned this townhouse, I've used that key no more than 2 or 3 times." He glanced around the room, his hand still hovering near the key, like part of him wanted to snatch it back. "When it's not in use, I hide it, far away. Not because of superstition, but because if it fell into the wrong hands..." He trailed off, letting the weight of those words settle over them all. Then his eyes lifted and locked on Nathan Aldridge. That door, behind which lies that room, should have stayed locked forever. Minutes later, the group sat inside the lavish dining room. Candelabras flickered. Old portraits stared down from the paneled walls. Edmund had gone upstairs briefly. And Nathan? He was in his element, joking, teasing, trying to lighten the air. But his friends? They weren't laughing anymore. Their faces had gone pale, eyes restless. The silence wall was growing heavy. Then, footsteps. Edmund returned. His expression hadn't changed. He approached slowly, and then, from inside his coat, he produced something. An iron key. Heavy, cold, ancient. He placed it silently on the table. Edmund Grant turned to Nathan Aldridge, his eyes heavy with something between fear and pity. And then he said, voice low and firm, "If you're really sure about this, the key is yours." Without a flicker of hesitation, Nathan reached out and snatched the iron key from the table. He turned to his friends, raised it slightly like a trophy, as if to say, "I'm not afraid. Not now, not ever." Moments later, the entire group stood from the dining table. Edmund took the lead, guiding them toward a narrow, creaking staircase. The second floor was dim, the wooden floor groaning beneath their feet. They followed a hallway so tight their shoulders nearly brushed the faded wallpaper. And then, they reached it. A single door, closed, silent, waiting. All 7 men now stood just a few feet from it, breath held, glancing at one another. Despite owning the house, Edmund kept his distance, his face visibly uneasy. He wouldn't even look directly at the door. Even Nathan's friends, the ones who dared him to do this in the first place, they weren't smirking anymore. Their faces had drained of color, eyes wide, searching for some excuse to call this off. But Nathan, he looked calm, resolved. He wasn't backing out. With one deliberate motion, he reached into his coat, pulled out the cold iron key, and stepped forward. The key slid into the lock with a solid click, and the moment it began to turn, the others instinctively stepped back. Something about that sound, old metal grinding in an untouched lock, it felt like something was being awakened. Nathan turned the handle. The door creaked open, and for a brief second the group gasped. Then, silence. Nathan stood still, eyebrows raised, and then he laughed, because what he saw was just a room. It was just a bedroom. Yes, the furniture was old, but clearly expensive. A large wooden dresser stood against one wall, topped with a round mirror, its surface slightly clouded with age. On the opposite side stood a grand 4-poster bed, its curtains tied neatly at the corners. And from the ceiling just above the bed, a single red ribbon hung down. Nathan smiled to himself. He recognized it immediately. It was a bell pull used in noble households, connected to a bell in the servants' quarters. If the nobleman needed anything, he'd pull the ribbon and help would come. Nothing unusual, or so it seemed. Nathan stepped inside, but as he crossed the threshold, Edmund reached out, grabbing him gently by the wrist. "Nathan," he said, eyes dark and sincere, "this is your last chance. Are you absolutely sure?" Nathan looked back at his friends. He smiled. "I'll see you all in the morning, after I've won the bet." Then he shook off Edmund's hand, stepped fully inside, closed the door, and locked it. His friends stood frozen, still processing what had just happened. Even by Nathan's standards, this felt different, darker, riskier, and the guilt began to seep in. After all, they were the ones who dared him. If something, anything happened to him tonight, it would be on them. They turned to Edmund. He looked defeated, but he said quietly, "There's one more thing I want to show you before we sleep." He led them back down the hallway, down the staircase, past the dim dining room, to the very back of the townhouse. There they entered a separate space, a sort of studio apartment tucked behind the main residence. A small kitchen, laundry area, several narrow beds. This, Edmund explained, was where the house's servants once lived and worked. But tonight, they were all gone. I gave them the night off, Edmund said simply. I didn't want them here, in case something happened. He pointed up to a small vent in the ceiling just above the beds, and in a voice just barely above a whisper, he added, "From there, you can hear everything that happens in that room." Over the years, whispers grew into legends. Tenants and visitors alike spoke of horrible, unearthly wails pouring out from that upstairs room when no one was inside. But when they opened the door, silence. Still, every time they entered, the furniture was moved, heavy chairs dragged, tables shifted, dust patterns disturbed, but no footprints. And then came the sightings. A shape. No, a shadow, gray and shapeless, crawling across the walls, slithering along the floor. At first glance, it was nothing, but it felt wrong, deeply wrong. It wasn't human, and it wasn't spirit. It was something in between. They had no name for it, so they called it what they feared it was, the nameless thing, the physical embodiment of evil. But not everyone believed. And Nathan Aldridge, he mocked it. To him it was all nonsense, a silly ghost tale for aristocrats to tell after wine. When his friends dared him to spend one night in that cursed room, he didn't hesitate. Not for a second. To Nathan, this wasn't dangerous. It was an easy win. A good laugh. A wild story to tell at the gentleman's club. He had no idea. When his friends burst into the room that night, they froze. The bell cord had been ripped from the ceiling, torn clean out. Nathan's pistol lay on the floor near the bed, and in the wall opposite, a fresh bullet hole. So that was the bang they heard in the hallway. But that wasn't what made them scream. It was Nathan. He was lying stiff on the bed, eyes wide open and bloodshot. He still clutched the severed ribbon of the bell cord. His lips were drawn back in a gruesome snarl, teeth bared in terror. His whole body frozen as if he had seen something beyond this world. At first, they thought he was convulsing. They rushed in, calling his name, trying to shake him awake. But the moment they touched him, they knew Nathan was dead. That night, Edmund Grant summoned the coroner. The official verdict: massive heart failure. Cause unknown. But those who stood in that room knew. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't natural. Nathan had come face to face with the nameless thing, and it had done something no man should ever experience. It had scared him to death. In the 200 years since that fateful night, 50 Berkeley Square has changed hands many times, but that room, that cursed second-floor room, remains the same. Tenants still speak of cold spots, shadows that move, and voices in the walls. To this day, the room is considered one of the most haunted in the world, and if you ever find yourself there, don't stay the night, don't close the door, and above all else, don't pull the ribbon, because some things are not meant to be named, and some doors should never be opened. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more terrifying horror stories. Thanks for watching.